beneath the merciless sun of 1875 Wyoming, Elias McGraw, a war-scarred ex-cavalryman, battles drought and despair on his desolate ranch, haunted by the ghosts of a lost wife and child. Seeking solace in practicality, he requests a plain bride to share his burdens, but fate delivers Clara Whitfield, a woman whose beauty and secrets ignite the town's whispers and his guarded heart. Will their unlikely bond defy a past that hunts them, or will it unravel under the weight of danger? Subscribe to our channel and share where you're listening from. Home, commute, or elsewhere. Can Elias and Clara conquer fear to claim love? Stay tuned to find out. The sun clawed at the Wyoming territory with a vengeance, its heat turning the prairie into a cracked, gasping wasteland. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, coating everything in a gritty shroud. Elias McGraw stood on the sagging porch of his weathered ranch house, squinting against the glare. The year was 1875, and the drought had sunk its teeth deep into his land. The grass, once a sea of green, now crunched like brittle bones under his boots. His cattle, ribs jutting like fence posts, lowed mournfully in the distance, searching for a blade of hope in the scorched earth. At 35, Elias was a man carved by loss. The war had taken his youth, the fever his wife and infant son. 3 years had passed since he buried them on the hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that seemed to mock his solitude. The house, its unpainted boards silvered by time, stood as a hollow shell. 4 walls, a slanted roof, and a chimney that coughed smoke when the north wind howled. The barn, equally austere, sheltered a dwindling herd. The well, dug with his own blistered hands, spat less water each day, as if the land itself was bleeding dry. Elias lived alone, his only companions the relentless wind and the occasional cry of a hawk circling the barren hills. His hands, calloused from years of rope and leather, bore the scars of battles fought on horseback and the quieter wars of grief. He was still young enough to rebuild, old enough to know the cost. The silence of the prairie had become a weight, pressing against his chest, filling the empty spaces where laughter once lived. Tonight, under a sky bruised with twilight, Elias sat at the rough-hewn table inside his house, an oil lamp casting flickering shadows. Before him lay a sheet of paper, its edges curling like the land outside. He wasn't a man for words. His life was measured in sweat and survival. But the thought had taken root weeks ago, stubborn as sagebrush. He needed help, a partner to share the endless toil of keeping the ranch alive through another brutal winter. Not love, not the soft promises of poets, but a practical hand to haul water, mend fences, and face the cold. Love was a grave he'd already dug. His pen scratched across the page, the words blunt and unadorned. Dear Sir, I seek a practical woman of good character to join me as wife on my ranch in Wyoming territory. She need not be young or comely, only hard-working and quiet. I offer a solid roof, adequate provisions, and fair treatment. I am not given to drink or violence. Please forward this to any suitable candidate. He paused, the pen hovering. Plain, he added, underlining the word. Beautiful women brought trouble, jealousy, whispers, chaos. He'd seen it in Willow Creek, the town 15 miles east, where a pretty face could unravel the fragile order of frontier life. He wanted none of it. The letter felt like a confession, each word a surrender to necessity. Elias leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. The empty seat across the table stared back, a silent accusation. He could almost see his wife there, her gentle smile fading into the lamplight. Shaking the thought away, he sealed the letter with candle wax, the act final, like locking a gate. Tomorrow he'd ride to town and post it, setting in motion a future he couldn't quite picture. Outside, the coyotes began their nightly chorus, their howls weaving through the darkness. Elias checked the barn, secured the chickens, and pumped the last of the day's water from the reluctant well. The rituals, performed alone for so long, felt heavier tonight. He imagined a woman, sturdy, weathered, perhaps widowed like him, standing beside him, sharing the load. Her hands would be rough, her face lined by sun and hardship, her presence a quiet agreement to endure. No tender words, no dangerous sparks, just survival. Back inside, he banked the fire and climbed the narrow stairs to his room. The wind rattled the windows, carrying the lonely call of a wolf. Elias lay in the dark, the rough blanket pulled tight, his mind tracing the letter's journey eastward. He whispered a prayer to no one in particular. Let her be plain. Let her be ordinary, unremarkable. Let her bring no beauty to tempt me, no dreams to stir what's dead. The prairie answered with its endless moan, indifferent to the hopes of men. Somewhere in the night, fate stirred, already weaving a story far wilder than Elias McGraw could ever have planned. As the Wyoming night swallowed Elias McGraw's prayer for a plain bride, a train rumbled eastward, carrying his letter toward an unknown fate. 6 weeks later, a telegram arrived, terse as a rifle shot. Bride arriving Tuesday, noon, meet at station. The words sat heavy in Elias's gut, like a stone in a dry riverbed. Come Tuesday, the sun burned high, scorching the cracked earth as he hitched his gaunt horses to the wagon. Dressed in a clean shirt and the black jacket he'd worn to his family's funeral, Elias drove the 15 miles to Willow Creek, his boots polished to a stranger's shine. Willow Creek was no town for grand welcomes, just a cluster of weathered buildings hunched along a dusty street, the saloon's crooked sign creaking in the wind. The railway station, a new scar on the old land, buzzed with anticipation. News of Elias's mail-order bride had spread like wildfire across the sagebrush. Townsfolk gathered, their eyes sharp with curiosity and judgment. Mrs. Larson from the boarding house clutched her shawl, whispering to her daughter. The Tucker brothers, reeking of whiskey, leaned against the station wall, smirking. Even Reverend Holt, Bible in hand, lingered, as if sanctity could tame the gossip. Elias tied his horses, feeling the weight of every stare. He was the hermit now, the war-broken rancher who'd turned his back on their dances and sermons. A man alone was a suspect in Willow Creek. A man seeking a wife through an advertisement was a spectacle. He stood on the platform, hat low, hand steady despite the knot in his chest. The train's whistle pierced the air, a mournful cry that silenced the crowd. Black smoke billowed, and the locomotive shuddered to a stop, hissing steam like a cornered beast. Passengers spilled out, a peddler with a battered case, a family in threadbare coats, an old woman clutching a bag like a lifeline. Elias scanned each face, searching for the plain, sturdy woman he'd pictured, middle-aged, work-worn, unremarkable. The platform emptied. Doubt crept in. Had she changed her mind? Then she appeared. Clara Whitfield stepped from the passenger car, one gloved hand on the rail, and the world seemed to pause. She was young, no more than 25, with hair like autumn wheat pinned under a simple hat. Her dress, modest in cut, clung to a graceful frame, but it was her eyes, sage honey, fierce yet weary, that struck Elias like a hoof to the chest. The crowd inhaled as one, whispers igniting. "That's her," Mrs. Larson hissed. "McGraw's snagged a rose in this dust heap." The Tucker brothers chuckled, their eyes raking Clara with brazen hunger. Elias froze, his throat dry as the prairie. This wasn't the woman he'd asked for. She was trouble wrapped in calico, a spark in a tinderbox town. Clara's gaze swept the platform, locking onto him. "Mr. McGraw?" Her voice was soft but clear, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. He nodded, stepping forward, aware of every eye boring into him. "Miss Whitfield, I presume." His words felt clumsy, inadequate. She offered a small smile, tinged with exhaustion, and gestured to a single trunk, her only luggage. Elias lifted it, the weight light compared to the burden of her presence. "My wagon's this way," he said, leading her through the crowd. Whispers trailed them like dust clouds. "A beauty like that? She's running from something," Mrs. Larson muttered. "Ain't natural, McGraw with a woman like her," a Tucker sneered. The walk to the wagon stretched endlessly, each step heavy with unspoken questions. Why had she come? What drove a woman like her to answer a rancher's call for a plain bride? Clara sat straight on the wagon seat, her hands folded, hat shading her face against the relentless sun. She said nothing as they left Willow Creek, the town's chatter fading into the creak of wheels and the clop of hooves. Elias glanced at her, noting the tight set of her jaw, the way her fingers gripped each other until the knuckles paled. "This ain't what you expected," he said finally, gesturing to the barren plains, dotted with sagebrush and despair. Clara's eyes met his, steady but guarded. "I expected nothing, Mr. McGraw. Expectations are a luxury I left behind." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning she didn't share. Elias tightened his grip on the reins, the road stretching toward his ranch like a sentence yet to be written. She wasn't the partner he'd envisioned. No calloused hands, no weathered face. But something in her silence matched his own, a shared weight of secrets too heavy for words. The ranch came into view, its weathered house and barn dwarfed by the vast emptiness. Clara stepped down before he could offer a hand, surveying the place with a practical eye. The chickens scratched in their pen, raising tiny dust storms. The garden plot lay barren, a victim of drought and neglect. Elias watched her, waiting for a complaint, but she only nodded. "It's quiet," she said, almost to herself. "Lonely," he corrected, wanting no illusions. She turned to him, those honeyed eyes unreadable. "Sometimes, loneliness is enough." Inside, the house felt smaller with her in it. She moved through the sparse rooms, noting the bare necessities: a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove. Elias showed her to a small chamber, a narrow bed, and a washstand, its only furnishings. "It's yours," he said, avoiding mention of its past as his wife's sewing room. Clara set her trunk down, her movements precise. "It'll do," she said, and he felt the first crack in his resolve, a flicker of something dangerous stirring beneath his grief-hardened heart. Clara Whitfield's words hung in the Wyoming air, her declaration that sometimes lonely is enough, echoing like a distant bell in Elias McGraw's mind as he shut the door to her room. The ranch house settled into an uneasy quiet, its walls creaking under the weight of a new presence. Dawn broke harsh and unrelenting, the sun of 1875 scorching the parched earth as Elias trudged to the barn, his boots kicking up dust that tasted of defeat. The drought tightened its grip, the well coughing up muddy trickles, the cattle growing gaunt. Yet Clara emerged from the house, sleeves rolled up, ready to face the day's toil with a resolve that both steadied and unnerved him. She didn't flinch at the ranch's hardships. By mid-morning, Clara was at the garden plot, clawing at the cracked soil with a hoe, coaxing life from dirt that had forgotten how to yield. Elias watched from the corral, mending a broken fence, as she hauled water from the faltering well, her movements precise, uncomplaining. When a hen escaped its coop, she chased it down with a swiftness that rivaled the hawks overhead, securing it with a firm hand. At noon, she saddled a horse, an old mare Elias thought too stubborn for anyone but him, and rode out to help herd the cattle to a patch of sparse grass, her posture in the saddle as natural as if she'd been born to it. Night brought the wolves. Their howls sliced through the darkness, closer than before, drawn by the scent of weakened livestock. Elias was checking the barn when a shadow moved near the corral, a gray shape, eyes glinting like steel. Before he could reach for his rifle, a shot cracked in the air. The lead wolf dropped, a clean hole through its skull. Clara stood on the porch, rifle steady in her hands, her face lit by moonlight and resolve. "Learn to shoot, young," she said, voice flat but eyes sharp. "A woman alone needs to know how." Elias stared, his pulse hammering, not just at her skill, but at the fire in her that burned brighter than he'd expected. They fell into a rhythm, two strangers bound by necessity. Elias worked the fences and tended the herd, while Clara battled the dust that seeped through every crack, scrubbed pots until they gleamed, and fed the chickens with a practical eye. Yet the distance they'd agreed upon, a business arrangement, nothing more, began to fray. At supper, as lamplight cast shadows across the table, their eyes met too often, lingering a beat, too long. Her hand brushed his when passing the bread, and the air crackled with something unspoken. Elias pushed it down, fearing the pull of a heart he'd buried years ago. One evening, as the horizon bled crimson, Clara stood by the dry garden, sifting soil through her fingers. "This ground's not dead," she said, "just thirsty. Like us." Elias, mending a bridle nearby, paused. Her words weren't just about the land. "You talk like you've known hard times," he said cautiously. She didn't look up. "St. Louis wasn't kind. My father was a judge, but his justice came at a price. Sold land from under honest folks for railroad money. I was part of his world until I couldn't stomach it." Her voice hardened. "Ran from a man who thought he could buy me like he bought my father's debts." Elias's chest tightened. Her past wasn't his to pry into, but her confession cracked open a door he'd kept locked. "I ran from war," he admitted, surprising himself. "Thought this ranch would be peaceful. Found out it's just another fight." She met his gaze, her sage honey eyes holding no judgment, only understanding. For a moment, the prairie's silence felt less heavy, shared between them. If you're caught up in this tale of grit and redemption, join us by subscribing to the channel. Share where you're listening, maybe from a dusty porch or a city commute, and let's keep this story alive together. But the town's whispers grew louder. On their weekly supply run, Willow Creek's stares turned colder. "That Whitfield girl's trouble," Mrs. Larson muttered at the general store, her voice carrying. "Too pretty for honest work." The Tucker brothers leered, their comments crude enough to make Elias's fists clench. Clara held her head high, but her knuckles whitened around the basket. "They don't know me," she said later, as they loaded the wagon. "They see what they want to see." Elias nodded, but the town's scorn gnawed at him, stirring memories of battles where trust was a luxury. Back at the ranch, the drought worsened. The wells sputtered, the cattle bellowed their thirst, and a calf collapsed, too weak to stand. Clara knelt beside it, her hands gentle but firm, trying to coax it to drink. "We're losing them," she said, not accusing, just stating the truth. Elias looked at her, dirt streaking her face, and saw not the beauty that troubled him, but a partner who matched his stubborn will to endure. That night, as coyotes sang their mournful chorus, he lay awake, the thin wall between their rooms a fragile barrier against the growing bond he feared to name. Clara wasn't the plain bride he'd wanted. She was a storm, fierce and unyielding, threatening to upend the life he'd built on solitude. Clara Whitfield's fierce presence lingered in Elias McGraw's mind, her storm-like spirit a shadow he couldn't shake as he stared at the ceiling through another sleepless night. Dawn broke over the Wyoming Territory in 1875, the sky a merciless blue, promising no relief from the drought that choked the land. The ranch groaned under the weight of survival, but Clara's resolve had sparked something in Elias, a flicker of defiance against the despair that had long held him captive. By noon, they were at the well, its pump now a stubborn relic, yielding only sludge. Clara pointed to a cluster of stunted cottonwoods near the pasture. "Water runs deep there," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Those trees are still alive?" Elias scoffed, exhaustion sharpening his tongue. 8 years I've worked this land. You think I ain't looked for water?" But her eyes, sage, honey, and unyielding, held his doubt at bay. They began digging, taking turns with the shovel under the sun's hammer. Sweat stung their eyes, dirt caked their hands, and by dusk, they'd clawed 6 feet into the earth, finding only dust. "This is madness," Elias growled, with blisters raw on his palms. Clara took the shovel, her dress torn and filthy. "Then be mad with me," she said, jumping into the hole. Her determination burned brighter than the fading light, and Elias, against his better judgment, grabbed a pickaxe and joined her. The ground fought back, hard as iron, but Clara attacked it with a ferocity that matched the wolves circling closer each night. Just before full dark, the shovel struck damp earth. A cry broke from Clara, half triumph, half exhaustion, as water seeped into the hole, a thin but precious trickle. They collapsed on the edge, breathless, dirt-streaked, sharing a rare laugh that felt like rain on parched ground. "How'd you know?" Elias asked, his voice softer than he meant. Clara looked to the cottonwoods, their leaves trembling in the breeze. "My grandfather taught me to read the land, said it speaks if you listen." The new well changed everything. The cattle drank deeply, their bellows quieter, and Clara's garden began to stir, green shoots defying the drought. But Willow Creek's venom grew sharper. On their next supply run, the town's whispers had turned to accusations. Word of Clara's past had leaked, her father's corruption, her flight from a St. Louis suitor. "She's a curse," Mrs. Larson spat at the general store, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "Bringing ruin to McGraw and us all." The Tucker brothers, emboldened, muttered about teaching her a lesson. Elias's hand twitched toward his gun, but Clara's steady grip on his arm stopped him. "Words don't break us," she said, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Then came the real threat. A rider arrived at the ranch, dust trailing his black thoroughbred like a storm cloud. He was no local. His suit screamed city money, his pale eyes cold as a snake's. "Elias McGraw," he said, dismounting with a predator's grace. "I'm Victor Crane, sent by Mr. Hargrove of St. Louis. Clara Whitfield belongs to him. Hand her over, or this town burns." Elias stepped forward, his shadow long in the fading light. "She's my wife. No man owns her." Crane's smile was a blade. "No papers? No preacher. You're playing house rancher. Hargrove's got a contract, her father's debts, paid in full for her hand." Clara emerged from the house, her rifle in hand, face pale but resolute. "I'm no man's property," she said, voice cutting through the tension. Crane's gaze raked her, dismissive. "Hargrove's men are coming. 3 days, maybe less. Willow Creek will hand you over, or they'll pay." He mounted his horse, leaving a folded paper in the dust, a copy of the contract, legal and binding. Elias picked it up, his hand steady despite the rage boiling inside. Clara sank to her knees, the paper trembling in her grasp. "I didn't know he'd follow me this far," she whispered. "He'll destroy everything to have me." Elias knelt beside her, the new well's water glinting nearby. "He'll have to go through me," he said, his voice low but iron hard. Clara shook her head, eyes wide with dread. "You don't know Hargrove. He's broken stronger men than you, families, towns. I should leave, spare you this." Elias gripped her shoulders, his war-scarred resolve flaring. "Running feeds the dark. We face it, Clara. Together." She nodded, a spark of her earlier fire returning, but the air felt heavy, charged with the promise of violence. That night, as stars burned cold above the prairie, Elias oiled his revolver, the weight of it familiar from battles he'd sworn to leave behind. Clara sat across from him, cleaning her own rifle, her movements precise, but her hands trembling. The coyotes were silent, as if sensing the greater predator approaching. 3 days, Crane had said. 3 days, until Hargrove's men rode in, bringing blood and fire. Elias looked at Clara, her face half-shadowed by lamplight, and knew the ranch wasn't just a patch of dirt anymore. It was a stand, a line drawn in the dust, and he'd fight for it, for her with everything he had left. Elias and Clara's tale of grit and defiance in the Wyoming wilderness is just one spark in the vast frontier. Their fight for love and survival against a merciless land and a vengeful past leaves us wondering, what would you risk for a chance at redemption? We're grateful you joined us for this journey. Your presence keeps these stories alive. Please share your thoughts in the comments. What moved you most? Where are you listening from? A quiet porch or a bustling city? Subscribe to catch the next chapter of Courage and Heart. Until we meet again under the prairie stars, keep the fire of these tales burning.